welcome everyone to Notorious Crime Stories channel, where we dive deep into mysterious criminal cases, uncovering gripping details that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last moment. If you love solving crimes and thrilling detective stories, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Notorious Crime Stories.
Have you ever wondered about the hidden desires lurking deep within the souls of those obsessed with crime? How far can such concealed thoughts and desires lead them down the path of sin? Today, we will explore the darkness of one of the most horrifying cases humanity has ever witnessed. When you look at the slender legs of young girls, what do you see? Their beauty, their confidence, or something darker? But for someone else, they feel hunger. Yes, this is not a fictional story, but the haunting truth about notorious serial killers who have instilled fear in the world. Just like the infamous case of Jeffrey Dahmer, this notorious killer from the United States became a nightmare in the minds of many Americans, especially after Netflix recreated his gruesome case in a movie. Dahmer brazenly took the lives of 17 innocent victims and didn't stop there. He turned them into meals to satisfy his nightly hunger, which haunted his mind. But Dahmer wasn't the only one. In Asia, another man committed similar crimes, Issei Sagawa, a name that instills fear when mentioned. However, unlike Dahmer, Sagawa was never punished for his crimes and still lives freely in society. Today, we will explore these cases and delve into the twisted psychology that fueled the minds of these killers. One of the most notorious serial killers in history left behind a terrifying legacy with a total of 17 victims, all of whom were men. While many of Dahmer's victims were African American, not all belonged to the same race. Dahmer lured his victims into his sinister presence, and after killing them, he conducted horrific experiments on their bodies, including eating them, an act of grotesque cruelty that he performed to satisfy his darkest desires. This butcher often dissected his victims to satisfy his sick curiosity about the internal organs of the human body. In fact, these acts were not just signs of a distorted mind, but the beginning of a path toward future terrifying crimes. Dahmer's perverted pleasures did not diminish over time. Instead, they grew more frightening and dangerous. In one session with a psychologist, Dahmer recalled the first time, at the age of 6, when his eyes rested on the thighs of a male classmate, and a chilling thought crossed his mind. What would it taste like? Finally, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested on July 22, 1991, when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, escaped and led the police to his crime-filled apartment. What the police found there shocked the entire world: a fridge filled with body parts, photos of victims being tortured, and an overwhelming stench. All were undeniable evidence of Dahmer's crimes. He was sentenced to 16 life terms in prison in 1992. But just 2 years later, Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate in prison. But while Dahmer mainly targeted African American victims, today's character, Issei Sagawa, a Japanese man born on April 26, 1949 in Kobe Prefecture, Japan, sought out Western female victims. Unlike many other cases I've mentioned, Sagawa was actually born into a wealthy family. His father was the president of a company, and his uncle was an editor for a major Japanese newspaper. Sagawa shared with the media that his family, particularly his father, supported him a great deal, showing him much love and care. Sagawa was raised in an environment filled with love, but it seems all this did not deeply affect his twisted thoughts. However, Issei Sagawa also had a complex relationship with his family, especially with his parents. Despite the difficulties in this relationship, his father always stood by him, supporting him through tough times in the military and university. His father was a strong pillar for him. This shows that although both Dahmer and Sagawa became notorious killers, their childhoods were not as bad as many people often think. These details only add to the complexity and mystery of Sagawa and Dahmer, showing that the root of evil sometimes doesn't lie in external circumstances, but in the dark corners of the soul that not everyone can see. In 1973, at the age of 24, Sagawa attempted to attack a blonde German woman at her apartment in Japan. However, his crazy plan failed because the victim woke up unexpectedly, and Sagawa was arrested. But thanks to his family's powerful influence, Sagawa quickly escaped the law without facing any punishment for his horrific crime. This truth created a major loophole in justice, leaving many people feeling that justice had not been served. The charges were dropped, and the suspect was only fined a small amount of money. 2 years later, in 1975, Sagawa left Japan and moved to France to pursue a PhD in literature at a university in Paris. His distorted mind believed that in a foreign land, he could easily escape the law and continue his inhumane actions. While living in Paris, Sagawa's dark desires grew even more uncontrollable. Almost every night he spent time approaching girls in the red light district while plotting to take their lives. He even bought a gun to carry out his crimes, but each time he tried, he cowardly failed to pull the trigger. In 1981, at the age of 32, Sagawa met Renée Hartevelt, a beautiful Dutch woman and his classmate. He saw her as the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, just as Dahmer was obsessed with finding the most handsome and attractive man to dominate. With low self-esteem and a distorted self-image, Dahmer always wanted to feel in control, especially over those he considered weaker. Sagawa was the same. Although he saw himself as a small, ugly, and weak man, the twisted killer had already prepared a gun to carry out his plan against Renée. The woman, much taller than him, was only 25 years old at the time and was studying literature. She completely trusted Sagawa, believing him to be a harmless, small man. The two went out together several times, with Sagawa always acting polite and friendly. Finally, he invited Renée to his apartment for dinner, using the excuse that he needed help with his German lessons. The young woman had no idea that these sessions to help Sagawa with German would lead to a tragic ending for her life. On that fateful night, as she sat down at the desk and began reading poems in her clear voice, Sagawa silently approached from behind and shot her. Although Renée was aware of what had just happened, she screamed before collapsing to the floor. Later, when questioned by police, the psychotic killer calmly described his actions as if he were recounting a buffet he had planned for 32 years. After taking Renée's life, Sagawa committed horrific acts on her body. He even studied the left side near the heart, noting that it contained more blood, so he began by biting into the right side of her body. Realizing that his teeth were not sharp enough to tear through her flesh, he used a knife from the kitchen. But this did not satisfy him either. Sagawa went out to buy a meat cleaver to continue his horrific actions. The murderer began using the newly purchased knife to dismember parts of the victim, eating some raw and cooking other parts, storing the rest in the refrigerator for later use. Even more terrifying, Sagawa admitted to police that his favorite part was the victim's face. He didn't stop there. He photographed every step of his process, just like Jeffrey Dahmer did with his victims. For both of these killers, photographing their crimes was a way to preserve memories and satisfy their perverted desires. Sagawa committed his crime in June, a hot month in Paris, and since air conditioning wasn't common back then, he knew he needed to dispose of Renée's body as soon as possible. He began cutting her into smaller parts and placed them into 2 separate suitcases. When he called a taxi to take the suitcases to a lake near the university, the taxi driver helped him lift the heavy suitcases, even joking, "Oh my God, what's so heavy? Could it be a body?" Though it was just an innocent joke, the driver was right. Sagawa was indeed carrying the remains of the 25-year-old woman to the lake to dispose of his crime. However, when he noticed many people around, he hurriedly searched for a more secluded spot. Finally, the killer found a quiet corner and began pushing the bags into the water, trying to hide the evidence of his crime at all costs. But as he focused on his actions, a French man passing by grew curious about the mysterious bags. With a calm demeanor, Sagawa denied any involvement. However, the man opened the bag and discovered blood-stained sheets, immediately screaming that there was a body inside. Just days later, French police arrested Sagawa. Sagawa's family hired a lawyer to defend him, and while awaiting trial, he was held for up to 2 years. French psychiatrists concluded that Sagawa had severe mental disorders, and the judge ordered that he be transferred to a psychiatric facility rather than a prison. However, this horrifying story quickly spread in Japan, making Sagawa a figure of fear across the land of the rising sun. The French authorities then decided to deport Sagawa back to Japan and drop the criminal charges, hoping he would be transferred to a mental hospital in his home country. When Sagawa arrived in Japan, doctors there did not find him to have severe mental illness, but diagnosed him with a personality disorder. They concluded that the brutal acts of this twisted-minded person stemmed from deviant fantasies and desires, rather than from any serious pathological condition. This creates a significant challenge in detaining the murderer, as there was no strong legal basis to keep him in the hospital. With no strong legal grounds to detain him and no further reason to continue treatment, Sagawa was released from the hospital and lived freely like anyone else. However, what infuriated many was that upon being released, he showed no remorse and exploited his notoriety to make a living. He coldly continued his life, painting and selling artworks he claimed depicted beautiful women who had become a sick obsession in his twisted mind. Sagawa even hired a manager to help sell these artworks, turning them into his primary source of income. But beneath this business lay a disturbing shamelessness. He not only painted but also wrote up to 20 books, one of which contained photos of Renée and detailed descriptions of the gruesome acts he committed with her body. It is unimaginable how painful and infuriating it must have been for Renée's family to see these cruel acts publicly displayed so brazenly in a civilized society like Japan. Sagawa later admitted that he felt regret for publicizing Renée's photos, but not out of compassion. Rather, it was because fans had requested his autograph on those photos in copies of his book. This irony and heartlessness didn't stop there. Sagawa also participated in films, including adult films, where he played the lead role in scripts that mirrored his own horrific crimes, continuing to turn these acts into tools for profit and fame. Even at the age of 70, Sagawa had not changed. In a recent interview, he boasted that he was no longer attracted to Western women, but had shifted his focus to Japanese women, particularly those from Okinawa, whom he disgustingly described as looking delicious. These words clearly showed that after decades, this monster still lived with terrifying desires that had not diminished. What is even more horrifying is that many who interviewed Sagawa tended to encourage him to share details about his horrific actions, sparking ethical debates about journalism and media. Turning murderers like him into public figures not only negatively impacts society but also deeply wounds the victims' families. Though Sagawa admitted to his heinous crimes, he never expressed true remorse in the way people would expect. He described enjoying human flesh as a natural act, merely a normal desire. Even more horrifying, Sagawa revealed that his craving for human flesh intensified in the summer when women wore less clothing. Both Sagawa and Dahmer were aware that what they did was wrong, yet they lacked the ability to feel empathy or regret. They didn't justify their actions or blame their circumstances. Instead, they acknowledged that these were decisions they made on their own. However, unlike many other criminals, Sagawa and Dahmer didn't act out of hatred. They merely saw their innocent victims as objects to satisfy their dark desires. Regarding the origin of these sick behaviors, some theories suggest that both killers may have been affected even before birth. In Sagawa's case, his premature birth and frequent hospital visits during his early years may have negatively impacted his psychological development. The biggest difference between the two is how they were held accountable for their actions. Dahmer was punished in prison and died in a prison fight, while Sagawa never faced any legal consequences for his horrific crimes. Sagawa became a celebrity in Japan, and had he not been arrested, he might have continued to commit more atrocious acts. His freedom to do whatever he pleased posed a significant danger. In one interview, Sagawa admitted that he still harbored sick urges and wanted to act on them before he died, but it seems that few took his words seriously. This is extremely alarming, as individuals like Sagawa still exist, and without intervention, they could cause even more horrifying actions. This is clearly a warning that must be taken seriously. One notable point here is that in the entire tragedy, both killers were honest when caught and openly shared what was truly going on in their minds, giving us a clearer understanding of their psychology. This happened because these individuals did not see their actions as wrong, only as a way to satisfy their psychological urges. This shows that such twisted individuals still exist, and we must take steps to prevent, control, and protect ourselves before these people cause more horrifying damage to humanity. On November 24, 2022, Issei Sagawa passed away at the age of 73 from pneumonia in a hospital in Tokyo, with only his relatives attending his funeral. Sagawa and Dahmer's heinous actions caused the world to recoil in disgust and anger. These crimes not only serve as a wake-up call about the twisted psychology of certain individuals, but also highlight the importance of understanding and preventing such perverse desires before they turn into terrifying acts of violence. This emphasizes the need for greater attention to mental health, not only on an individual level, but also within communities and the legal system. Neglecting the detection and treatment of psychological disorders can lead to serious consequences, not just for those suffering from these conditions, but for society as a whole. This is why mental health professionals consistently encourage parents to engage more openly with their children about their thoughts and emotions, especially in Asian cultures, where children often tend to suppress their feelings and share little about their inner experiences with their parents.